Ever wonder what it feels like to catch your wife getting off to another man's photos? Yeah, that happened. And trust me, it didn't stop there. When I found out who he was and what they were really doing, I didn't just get mad. I got even. You think you know what revenge looks like? Wait until you hear what I did that shattered everything. This isn't your typical story of betrayal. It's darker, dirtier, and full of secrets no one's ready to admit. Ready for a wild ride? Let's go. Let's just start this off by saying that I'm going to change the names here so nobody can recognize who I'm talking about. Trust me, the last thing I need is people poking around, especially with how this story goes. So yeah, my name's Dan. I'm in my mid-40s, and I do demolition for a living. It's a brutal job, man. Long hours, a ton of sweat, and sometimes you're up to your elbows in God knows what. But the pay? It's good. Real good. Enough to keep the lights on, and a bit more for the rainy days. And honestly, there's something about smashing down walls that's oddly satisfying, even if it leaves you feeling like you got hit by a truck at the end of the day. I'm married to Sarah. Well, that's not her real name, obviously. It's my second marriage. Sarah's great, though. She runs her own photography business and does pretty well for herself. Weddings, family portraits, the occasional artsy gig. You know, that sort of thing. She's always buzzing around, camera in hand, juggling a million different things. She's got her act together in a way I sometimes wish I did. Then there's our kid, little 2-year-old ball of energy. Let's call him Jack. He's a good kid, smart, always curious. It's funny how he'll watch me work around the house with this look of awe, like I'm doing some kind of magic. He's the kind of kid that makes all the late nights and heavy lifting worth it. My first marriage didn't give me the chance to be a dad, so Jack, he's special. On the outside, everything probably looks solid. Hardworking guy, successful wife, a happy little family. But you know how it is. It's never as perfect as it looks. My first marriage, well, let's call her Emily. It was one of those stories you'd hear and think, man, they've got it all figured out. We were together for a long time, nearly 15 years. And those years were full of love and passion, the kind of connection that leaves you thinking it'll last forever. Emily and I were high school sweethearts. You know, the classic tale. We were inseparable from the start. The kind of couple everyone was a little envious of. We just clicked in this effortless way. No games, no hesitation, we just dove headfirst into it. Back then, I thought that's what love was supposed to be. Intense, all-consuming. We built a life together, grew up together, really. Everything we did felt like a joint mission, road trips, moving into our first place, even the small things like picking out a damn couch. Every little moment was filled with passion. And the physical side? Man, we had that spark that people talk about but rarely ever find. It wasn't just lust, though. It was deeper. We genuinely cared about each other. If I had a bad day at work, she'd know exactly how to get me out of that headspace. She was always there for me, no matter what. And I was the same for her. We had this intense connection, almost like we were addicted to each other. But, you know, as time went on, things changed. That fire that burned so bright, it started flickering. We started drifting. I don't know if it was just life getting in the way, or maybe we grew into different people. At some point, we stopped being partners and started just coasting. We were comfortable, but it wasn't enough anymore. The love was still there, but it wasn't the kind that kept you up at night. Eventually, it just kind of fell apart. There wasn't a big blowout fight, no cheating or betrayal. Just two people who realized they weren't the same people they'd fallen in love with. It was one of the hardest decisions of my life. Letting go of something that had been everything for so long. And now, here I am, married for the second time to Sarah. It's different. It's good, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I catch myself thinking about Emily and the life we had. That kind of intensity doesn't just disappear from your memory, even when you're trying to move on. So, Sarah, my wife, well, she's always meeting new people through her photography business. Weddings are her bread and butter, and you know how those go. She's always in the mix, capturing every little detail, making sure the bride's hair looks perfect, and getting all the candid shots that people want to look back on. It's her thing, and she's damn good at it. One of those weddings, she meets this guy. Let's call him Kyle. He's young, early 20s tall, one of those kids that just looks like he stepped out of a magazine without even trying. From what Sarah told me, he was super into photography too, loved the art of it, and had this dream of becoming a model. He's at this wedding as a guest, just hanging around while Sarah's working, but they get to talking during a break. I guess he's one of those smooth talkers, full of big ideas and ambition. Sarah's always had a soft spot for people like that, creative, driven, kind of on the edge of making something big happen. She sees herself in them, I think. So when Kyle starts going on about how he's looking to break into modeling, she sees an opportunity. He asks if she ever does portfolio work, and of course she does. It's not her main thing, but she's done a few shoots for people trying to get their start. They agree to set something up, a photo shoot to help him get some shots for his portfolio. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, Sarah's always doing stuff like this, meeting clients, doing shoots, building her network. It's part of the job. And to be honest, when she first mentioned Kyle, I wasn't paying much attention. She meets dozens of people at these weddings, and I'm usually too wiped from work to care about the details. But then after that shoot, things started to feel different. When Sarah came home after that first shoot with Kyle, she was absolutely buzzing. I hadn't seen her that excited about a photo shoot in a while. I remember her walking through the door, practically glowing, talking about how Kyle was a natural in front of the camera. She said he had this energy, this raw potential that made every shot easy. She couldn't stop raving about how the photos turned out. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Like I said, she's always been passionate about her work, and when she clicks with a client or a model, she lights up like that. It's one of the things I love about her, how deeply she gets into her craft. So I brushed it off. Just another day in her world, right? But then there was another shoot. This time, though, the style was different. She mentioned it casually, like it wasn't a big deal, which, to be fair, in her line of work, it probably wasn't. She told me Kyle wanted to build a more diverse portfolio, something to show off his versatility as a model. And that included doing a shoot in lingerie. Now, I know what you're thinking, but it's not unusual. It's standard in the industry. Models, both men and women, need those kinds of shots in their portfolio if they want to land certain gigs. So, when she explained it, it seemed legit professional. Still, something about it nagged at me. Maybe it was the way she was talking about it, a little too excited, or maybe it was just me being paranoid. But she insisted it was just work, that these kinds of shoots come up all the time, and there was nothing to worry about. And yeah, I trust her. I mean, we've been together for years, and if there's one thing we've always had, it's honesty. She showed me a couple of the shots from that second shoot, and I'll admit, the guy knew how to work the camera. The photos were good, really good, actually. Professional, tasteful, the whole thing. But still, seeing her work that closely with this young guy, especially in something as intimate as a lingerie shoot, it stirred something in me. But again, I pushed it down. This was her job. It was normal for model portfolios. Nothing out of the ordinary. Or so I told myself. A few days after that second shoot, something happened that still messes with my head. It had been a rough day at work. One of those long ones where everything goes wrong. Equipment breaking down, deadlines pushed, and I was exhausted. I ended up staying late, trying to get ahead on a demo job, and didn't make it home until well past Jack's bedtime. Sarah had put him to sleep by the time I got in. The house was quiet, dark except for a light coming from under the door of her office. I figured she was working, editing photos or something, which wasn't unusual. When she's in the zone, she can spend hours behind that computer, tweaking every little detail. But this time something felt off. The kind of off that you can't explain, but just hits you in the gut. I walked down the hall quietly, planning to pop my head in and say hi. Maybe give her a quick kiss before crashing on the couch. But as I got closer to the door, I heard something. At first, it was just soft sounds like she was moving around. But then I realized it wasn't just her shuffling in her chair. It was something else, something unmistakable. I opened the door just a crack, really, and there she was. Sarah, sitting in her chair, her back to me, completely lost in what she was doing. And it wasn't just that she was, jerking off, which in itself would have been fine. I mean, we all do that sometimes, right? But what made me freeze, what made my stomach twist into a knot, was the fact that she wasn't alone in her head. On her desk, spread out in front of her, were Kyle's photos. Those same lingerie shots from that second shoot. And she was staring at them, lost in the moment, completely unaware of anything else. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind just stopped. I stood there trying to process it. I wanted to burst through the door, scream, demand answers, but I couldn't. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, my heart pounding in my chest. Eventually, I backed away, careful not to make a sound. I didn't want her to know I'd seen. I couldn't face that conversation, not yet. I wasn't ready. So I turned around, walked back down the hall, and sat on the couch in the dark, trying to make sense of what the hell had just happened. That image of her, the way she was looking at those photos, it's burned into my mind. I felt like the ground had just opened up beneath me. I didn't sleep that night. And when Sarah finally came to bed, I pretended to be passed out. I had no idea how to deal with what I'd just seen, but I knew things were about to change. That night haunted me for days. I couldn't shake it. Every time I looked at Sarah, all I could see was her in that office, her eyes glued to Kyle's photos. It messed with my head in ways I wasn't prepared for. But the thing is, I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. I don't know why. I guess part of me didn't want to hear whatever explanation she might have. Maybe I was scared that whatever she'd say would make it worse. Or maybe I was just hoping it would go away if I ignored it long enough. But it didn't. I kept my mouth shut, but that tension, it was there, like a cloud hanging over us that neither of us acknowledged. To distract myself, I threw myself into work even harder. Long days, sometimes even weekends, just to keep my mind off of it. Around this time, Sarah started talking about wanting to launch her own photography courses. She'd been thinking about it for a while, and with all the connections she'd made through weddings and other gigs, it felt like the right move. She wanted to teach beginners, help them get started in photography, show them the ropes, and honestly, I thought it was a great idea. If anyone could teach photography, it was Sarah, but with Jack being a 2-year-old ball of chaos, she never had enough time to fully dive into it. So I stepped up, hired a babysitter, even though that wasn't cheap. I figured if it gave her more time to focus on her business and maybe took her mind off whatever that whole thing with Kyle was, it'd be worth it. 2 weeks later, Sarah launched her first round of classes. They were offline, in person, with a mix of theory and practice. She rented out a small studio space in the evenings, a few times a week from 6 to 8. It was a perfect setup for her students. They'd learn the basics, and then she'd have them practice what she taught them by taking real photos. I'd come home from work and take care of Jack while she was out teaching, and I tried to act like everything was normal. But it wasn't. It was like I'd pushed everything down, buried it deep, and now I was just waiting for something else to happen. I kept telling myself that this course was good for her, that maybe she was focused on her career again, and maybe that whole thing with Kyle was just a weird one-off moment. But then, some nights she'd come home after her classes, and she'd be glowing, just like after that first photo shoot with Kyle. Full of energy, talking about how well the classes were going, how her students were improving so much, how much she enjoyed teaching. And while part of me was genuinely happy for her success, another part of me couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her excitement than just the classes. I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding paranoid or crazy. So I stayed quiet, played the supportive husband, but inside, I was slowly unraveling. One of those nights after her lesson, something happened that really shook me up. It was around 8:30, and she still wasn't home. Usually, she's back by a little after 8, sometimes even earlier. I put Jack to bed and waited, thinking maybe the class ran a bit long. No big deal, right? But by 8:45, I started to get this knot in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing, but with everything that had been going on lately, my mind went straight to the worst possible places. I shot her a quick text. No response. By 9 o'clock, I called her phone. It rang a few times before going to voicemail. That knot in my gut, it got tighter. I tried to keep calm, but my head started spinning with all these wild scenarios. Maybe there was an incident, maybe something happened on the way home. I even thought for a second that maybe she'd been in an accident. I didn't want to go down that road, but when you can't reach someone, your brain doesn't always cooperate. I called again, straight to voicemail. At this point, I was pacing the living room, staring at the clock like it was mocking me. I thought about driving to the studio, but I didn't want to leave Jack alone. My thoughts were running a mile a minute, and every minute that passed just made it worse. Finally, around 9:15, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. She was calling back. I answered immediately, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Before I could even ask her where the hell she was, she spoke, sounding a little too casual for how worried I had been. "Hey, sorry, I got a little carried away with the students," she said, her voice light, almost laughing. "We were talking after class, just, chatting about the photos, and I didn't realize how late it had gotten." She explained that they'd all stayed after class for a bit, going over some of the shots they'd taken and discussing techniques. Apparently, it had turned into this impromptu, extended lesson. She assured me she was on her way home and would be there soon, but something about her tone bugged me. It was too easy, like she wasn't aware, or didn't care, how much time had passed. And after everything that had been going on, especially with the whole Kyle situation still looming in my head, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her staying late than just photography. I didn't push her on it. I just told her to drive safe and that I'd see her when she got home. But the whole thing left me feeling unsettled. She got home around 9:30, acting like everything was perfectly fine. She gave me a kiss, said she was sorry for making me worry, but honestly, the way she brushed it off made me feel even worse. It's not like she was doing anything openly wrong, but the seed of doubt was there, planted in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and it was slowly eating at me. That next lesson, it all unraveled. She was late again. This time, I didn't even bother pacing around or calling her. I just sat there, staring at the clock, waiting. By the time she walked in, smiling and apologizing like last time, I could feel something snap inside me. I didn't say anything at first. I just nodded as she told me the same story about getting carried away with her students. But this time I wasn't buying it. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced over, and there it was. A message popped up on her screen, and my heart nearly stopped. It felt so good. I've never felt anything like it. Kyle. His name right there, bold as day. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands clenched in a fist, my stomach twisted into a knot, but I didn't lose it right away. Instead, I picked up her phone, tried to keep my voice steady. "What the hell is this, Sarah?" She froze. Her eyes darted to the phone in my hand. What? What are you talking about?" I unlocked it and started scrolling. There it was, explicit messages, back and forth between her and Kyle. Photos too. Hot, steamy, explicit photos. Him. Her. It was like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through, each message making it worse. "What's going on?" I finally said, my voice low, barely controlled. Sarah just stood there, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing like she didn't know where to start. "Sarah," I snapped, my voice rising. "Talk. Now." She swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears. Okay. I'll tell you everything. Just let me explain." I didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at her, waiting for whatever excuse she was about to give me. "Kyle, he's a model, okay? I brought him in to help with my students, to give them someone to work with. It was totally professional at first, I swear." At first, I spat the words, feeling the bile rise in my throat. After the last lesson, we stayed late alone. We were talking, and I don't know what happened. There was this spark. We kissed. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it just did. "And tonight?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Her eyes dropped to the floor. She couldn't look at me. We had sex. After the class, we stayed late again, and we slept together. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind racing. I didn't know whether to scream or break down. "How long has this been going on?" "This was the first time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The first time we actually, and the messages? The photos?" I held up her phone, shaking it in front of her. "That doesn't happen in one night, Sarah. How long have you been doing this?" She started crying then, hard, her face buried in her hands. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I don't know what's wrong with me, Dan. I didn't plan this. It just happened. It was a mistake." I stood there, stunned. My whole body felt numb. I had no idea what to say, no idea how to process what I just heard. The woman I loved, the mother of my child, had just told me she'd slept with some young guy she'd been working with. And worse, she'd been sending him messages. Photos. While I was here at home, taking care of our son. I didn't say a word. I just stood there trying to catch my breath, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. As Sarah stood there, crying and trying to explain herself, I felt my hands tighten into fists. The anger that had been simmering for weeks finally broke through the surface. My mind flashed back to that night. The night I hadn't spoken about. The one I tried so hard to bury. I looked her dead in the eyes, my voice low but laced with anger. "This isn't the first time I've seen you with him." She blinked, confused, still sobbing. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, the words bitter in my mouth. "That night, when I came home late from work, Jack was already asleep. You were in your office." I paused, the memory making my skin crawl. "I saw you, Sarah. You weren't just working late. You were getting yourself off. And it wasn't just any regular night, was it?" Her face went white, like all the blood drained out of her at once. "Dan, don't." I cut her off, my voice shaking with anger. "You were off to his photos. Kyle's photos, weren't you? I saw you. I saw everything. And I didn't say a damn thing because I thought, no, I hoped that it was just some weird moment, that it would pass. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She just stood there, stunned, like I'd hit her with the full force of what she'd done. You've been fantasizing about him for weeks, sending him pictures, messages, and all this time I've been right here, taking care of our son, trusting you, thinking you were just doing your job. Her tears were coming harder now, but I couldn't feel any sympathy for her. Not anymore. My heart was pounding in my chest, my blood boiling. I've been holding all this in, trying to be calm, trying to figure out how to deal with it. But now I was angry, and that anger was turning into something darker. I stepped closer, my voice cold. Do you even understand what you've done? You've destroyed everything we've built. You threw it away for some kid. For what? A spark? A quick thrill? She tried to speak, her voice shaky. Dan, please, don't. I couldn't take her apologies. Not after this. I've been here. I've sacrificed for this family. I've given you everything. And this is what you do? You throw it in my face, over and over. And now you want me to just what? Forgive you? I laughed bitterly, stepping back, my hands trembling. No, Sarah, I'm not that guy anymore. You want to know what I'm thinking right now? I'm thinking about revenge. She looked at me, her eyes wide, terrified now. Revenge? Dan, what are you talking about? I'm talking about doing what you did, getting back at you the way you've stabbed me in the back. You think you're the only one who can look outside the marriage? I've been loyal to you, but maybe it's time I stop being that guy. The thought of revenge, of stepping out just like she had, burned hot inside me. I wasn't the kind of man who did things like this, but I wasn't the same guy who stood by quietly anymore either. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling. The betrayal, the hurt, the rage. I wanted her to know exactly how deep the knife had gone. She shook her head, panicking now. Done? Please don't do something you'll regret. I'm sorry, I cut her off again. Sorry? Sorry isn't enough this time, Sarah. You made your bed. Now you've got to lie in it. I stormed out of the room, leaving her there sobbing, my mind spinning with what to do next. I wasn't thinking straight. All I knew was that I wanted to hurt her back. That night, after the blow-up with Sarah, I couldn't calm down. I was too angry, too hurt, and the thought of revenge kept circling in my head like a vulture. I kept hearing her words, seeing those photos, and I felt sick. I needed to do something, to take control of the situation instead of letting it eat me alive. And then, without even thinking about it too much, I grabbed my phone. I pulled up Emily's number, my ex-wife. We hadn't talked in a while, years really aside from the odd birthday or holiday greeting. But I remembered our connection, the love we had once, and a small, bitter part of me wondered if maybe that was what I needed. Maybe Emily was the answer. I typed a quick message, feeling a mix of adrenaline and doubt as I hit send. Hey, Emily. Long time. Can we talk? To my surprise, she answered almost immediately. Dan? Wow, it's been a while. What's up? We exchanged a few more messages, and I didn't hold back. I told her I needed to see her, that I had something on my mind. I didn't dive into the details, but she must have sensed the urgency in my words. Within a few minutes, we'd set up a meeting. She lived nearby, not more than a 15-minute drive, so we agreed to meet in half an hour. I got in my car and drove, my heart pounding. I wasn't thinking clearly, just running on pure emotion. When I pulled up to her place, Emily was standing outside, waiting for me. She looked the same, still beautiful, still familiar in a way that made everything else seem distant. We exchanged awkward hellos, but that tension, that old chemistry was still there. We went inside, and the second the door closed, everything just exploded. It wasn't planned, but we fell into each other like no time had passed at all. There was no hesitation. It felt like the anger I'd been holding on to fueled every moment. It wasn't just about the passion. It was about reclaiming something. It was about revenge. We ended up in bed together, and I can't even lie. It was incredible. All the history, all the memories, the connection we used to have, it all came rushing back in that one moment, and it felt like a release I hadn't even known I needed. It was raw. It was intense, and I let it happen without any guilt. I wasn't thinking about anything but the sweet, burning need to get back at Sarah for what she'd done. Afterwards, as we lay there, both of us catching our breath, I reached for my phone. The idea hit me like a punch to the gut, and before I could overthink it, I snapped a quick photo of me and Emily in bed together. Her back was turned, the sheets barely covering us. But it was clear what had just happened. I didn't say a word as I sent the picture straight to Sarah. For a second, I just stared at the screen, waiting for the message to deliver. The second it did, I felt that rush of satisfaction, revenge, in all its bittersweetness. I wanted her to feel what I'd felt. The shock, the pain, the betrayal. It was twisted, I know, but in that moment it felt like justice. Emily didn't ask questions. She didn't have to. We both knew that whatever this was, it wasn't about rekindling old flames. It was about something else, something darker. And when I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt since all of this started. Control. When I got home that night, Sarah was waiting for me. Her face was pale, eyes red from crying, phone clutched in her hand. She must have seen the photo as soon as I sent it. She didn't waste any time before the tears started again, spilling out like she'd been holding them in all night. "Dan, how could you?" she cried, her voice breaking. "How could you do this to me?" I just stood there, a cold, bitter smile spreading across my face. "You're really asking me that? After everything you've done? After Kyle?" I couldn't help but laugh, though it wasn't out of joy or amusement. It was the laugh of someone who'd finally hit their breaking point. Sarah kept going, blaming me for what had just happened. "You didn't have to stoop so low. This was different. I didn't send you anything like that." I laughed again, harder this time, shaking my head. "You want to talk about low? You've been cheating on me for God knows how long with some kid, sending him photos, sneaking around behind my back. And now, you want to act like I'm the villain? Nah, Sarah, this one's on you." She kept crying, saying she was sorry, that what I did was worse, that I destroyed everything. But the truth is, everything had already been destroyed. What I did was just the final blow, and we both knew it. "You know who's really to blame here," I said, my voice flat. "You. This whole mess? It started with you and your little fling. Don't you dare turn this around on me." Her sobbing didn't stop, but at that point I didn't care anymore. The damage was done, and we were past the point of fixing anything. I'd hit my limit. "I'm done," I said, my voice calm now, like I'd finally made peace with it. "I'm not going to live like this, Sarah. You've broken every piece of trust we had, and now, after tonight, there's no going back. We're done. I want a divorce." She didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there stunned. Maybe she thought I'd eventually forgive her. Maybe she thought this would all blow over. But I was serious, and she could see it in my face. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it had to be done. We talked about Jack, about the house, about how we'd manage the split. It was painful, but the decision was clear. There was no coming back from what we'd both done. Life after the divorce was quieter. It took time, but I adjusted. I moved out, got my own place. Jack stayed with me on weekends, and I made sure he knew he was still the most important thing in my life. That didn't change. Sarah and I kept it civil for his sake, but our relationship was over. Whatever love we'd had was long gone, buried under the weight of betrayal and anger. Emily and I didn't keep in touch after that night. It had been a one-time thing, driven by rage and revenge, and I didn't regret it. It gave me the closure I needed, the final push to let go of what Sarah and I had once been. In the end, it was messy, painful, and not at all how I imagined things would turn out. But life goes on. You learn, you rebuild, and you keep moving forward. I may not have all the answers, but one thing's for sure. I won't let anyone drag me down like that again. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.